Starting the filming today on February 11th in the Calgary office where I am most weeks. I'm coming down with cold, though I'm still drinking my tea, so Barrett's half a foot farther from me.
Just stay over there.
Because Barrett's going on vacation starting tomorrow.
Just one day.
So he doesn't want to start his vacation with a Kleenex box. We are going to just do a couple updates here for you guys. And then we're going to wrap into an interview I did with our scheduling chair, John Jaenicke, at the end of this. Just want to quickly bring up the survey results. We had 56% of WestJet Pilots do the survey. Thank you very much. We had over 160 pages of comments. Also, thank you. And we're going to be talking about some of the comments and some of the survey results in a future video. We're meeting with the company for the first meeting that Barrett and I are having next week. I'm going to be kind of looking to find out from them more about, why aren't we making money? Why is Delta making money quarter after quarter and WestJet is still languishing in the negatives? A little bit of that. What are we trying to do as an airline? Are we trying to be lie flat beds or 28-inch seat pitch? What are we trying to do here? So just a general high-level stuff about with the company, as we both have questions for both groups back and forth, and then we'll get back to the pilot group on that kind of stuff. You had a couple of points, Barrett.
We do. Management meeting with the company is going to be good. We can sort of go over a couple of items that we've got that are concerning to the pilot group, see what they've got, discuss. Send out some more information once that happens. Latest developments, health and safety is once again in play. So that committee is staffed and increasing its size. They met with the company the first time with the new members yesterday, which was good to see. And I think we can now move forward with health and safety. It's been a bit quiet there for a while, but now these guys are ready to go. Cuba developments, obviously everybody knows what's going on there. We've stopped flying passengers into Cuba. WestJet's now just pulling passengers out of Cuba. Time frame for that, I would expect within the next 14 days. Most people go down there for a 7-day or 14-day vacation. And then we'll see what develops with that. Also, in terms of expenses when you're on the road, there is no obligation for crew members to use their own credit card. The company can organize this. You shouldn't have to be put out. If you're asked for hotels, transportation, etc. in Cuba or Colombia, it's completely unacceptable. The company should be arranging that for you. CAAT pension plan update. I was talking to Alfredo this week. There's been some changes there, so that's ongoing. We will give you more information when we hear about that. However, our money is safe, so we can still continue forward with the CAAT plan. Quick hotel update. Site visits have been completed in Narita. The committee is currently dealing with that hotel situation, whether we're changing the hotels, which hotel we're going to go to, as long as it follows the collective agreement. Last thing that I wanted to bring up was the arbitrations that we're currently dealing with. And in my last video with Jeff Roberts, we discussed increasing National's ability and strength when we head to the arbitrator. The past 72 hours has been very eye-opening. I would like to personally thank Jeff Roberts, Thomas Paul, Matt Engelman, Kevin Collins, and Nathan Lewis. All of us have been working together as a team nonstop over the past 72 hours for an arbitration that is currently in play. We will have more on that information shortly. They are just finishing it right now, so I think the next video and next communication will be with regard to that.
Thanks for that, Barrett. Just one thing, I actually expected to answer a couple questions from the pilot group this week, but we've had actually no darts submitted for this. So we've had no darts. If anybody has any questions for us to answer here, please go to dart.alpa.org and file a dart to the YouTube channel. We have a long interview with our scheduling chair talking about all sorts of things that I think is going to be really, really useful for the pilot group. That I did. And so we're also attaching his document, which is called Scheduling Matters, to this email, which the video will be part of, that everybody can look at 30,000 feet kind of thing. So we're going to go right to that video now. Thanks, Barrett.
Let's do it. Thanks.
We're just going to go through some of this stuff. Welcome, John. Chair of the scheduling committee for how long now?
I've been the chair. Well, I've been on the scheduling committee since we've joined ALPA, and I've been the chair probably for the last 4 years now. So, we're 2026 now, so that's over 8 years of experience on the schedule.
That's a lot of scheduling.
A lot of scheduling.
We'll blast right into it here. I've got a bunch of questions. You have a document that's going to be attached to this communication. It's called Scheduling Matters, and detailing all of this type of stuff. And we're going to run through a bunch of questions and just see where we can go from there, and hopefully give the pilots some good information here.
Sounds good.
Ready to blast into it. First question I have, the schedule. Your document identifies 5 key areas that form the 4 R's, as you call it: trip rigs, pairing reconciliation, reassignment rules, reserve, and scheduling adjustment window. Can you explain why the scheduling committee chose to focus on these specific areas, and how are they interconnected in terms of pilot quality of life and compensation?
Yeah, so over the last 3 or 4 years that we've been dealing with the contract, we've gotten thousands of darts. And so we've accumulated those darts and we reviewed them to identify 5 key areas. Now, there are a lot of areas in the contract that need attention, but we wanted to really highlight these 5 key areas. And they are rigs, reconciliation, reassignment, reserve, and the SAW. So I call them the 4 R's. And they all work a little bit together, right? So trip rigs, I think most people will understand what those are. Things like the time away from base credit, the min duty period credit, and a credit we'd like to see introduced called the average daily credit. Reconciliation, well, that's how our pairings are reconciled, right? So right now we reconcile everything over a pairing versus, industry standard, which is per segment or per day. The other thing is reassignment rules. Every pilot has been affected by our very company-friendly reassignment rules. So that's one of the big areas we'd like to see. Reserve, another area. We have a lot of pilots now on reserve for a lot longer, and we want to make those rules a lot better. Lastly, the SAW. The SAW was, we were the first Canadian carrier to bring in this concept of this scheduling adjustment window. And when we brought it in, we knew it was just the beginning of something that could be made a lot better to make a much more flexible schedule pilot. So, they all kind of come together and work together to really build, a better life and help in the overall compensation, especially on things like rigs and reassignment rules and reconciliation.
What's been the history like at WestJet? Because we used to have min daily credit.
No, we've never had min daily credit.
Okay.
We had a min daily credit when you got called out on reserve, when you got called out for overtime. That was it. But prior to CA1, we never had rigs at all. There were no trip rigs. You only got paid what you flew. So deadhead and stuff like that, those credits.
So it's generally gotten better over CA1 to CA2.
Yeah.
And then this is kind of like the look into potentially some stuff for CA3.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Your document states that WestJet's existing rig formulas are, quote, less generous and often fail to reflect the true value of a pilot's time. How does the comparison chart showing MDPC at 4.25 that you have in the document versus industry standard of 5+ illustrate the compensation gap that exists?
Yeah, I mean, just the value itself, right? So MDPC stands for the min duty period credit. So that's the credit that you receive while you're on duty. And so the larger the value, it's going to cover those days where you really don't do very much, right? So you could imagine especially out of Calgary, you're going to do that Kelowna turn or something like that. The min duty period credit will capture more value for those kind of low credit days. When we look at rigs, you have to think of them all working sort of together, right? So you've got a min duty period credit, you've got a duty period credit, and a time away from base credit, right? And they all have their place within, the rig system, right? So you might get a pairing where, you 48 hours somewhere. Well, you're not getting the min duty period credit for that layover length. What you are doing is getting the time away from base credit. So that's where that rig comes
So then it's a good point, because January 1st of this year, we switched to a 3.75 time away from base credit.
Right.
And how has that affected the pairing so far in 2026?
Well, you're starting to see more value, so more credit for those pairings that have those longer layovers, right? So the real reason you have rigs is to compensate you for your time, for the inherent network inefficiencies, right? You take an airline like WestJet, and what do? We fly to places like once a day, maybe like 3 times a week, a lot of, north-south flying that doesn't just interconnect very well. So that's why rigs are so important to us, because, we don't build the network. We have no say in where the airplanes go. So having these trip rigs help us, make sure that the unproductive flying, we get proper, we get the proper credit for that, right? And it also will help drive the computer that builds our pairings, so that what we call the solver, to try to make the pairings more efficient, because the solver doesn't want to pay you trip rigs. It wants to make you the most efficient pilot possible. So we'll try to build more efficient pairings, but we're a slave to our network, right? If we only have one flight to one place, there's not much that you can do. So that's where the rigs come in and provide you that credit. And overall, like if you start to work down rigs and stuff like that, what they can do is, instead of maybe working 16 days in a month, maybe they drop it down to 50, right? Because they're going to provide more credit for what you're doing in them.
So kind of like segueing into Mac's question, your document kind of explains that the average daily credit guarantee, a pilot can spend multiple days away from home, yet earn significantly less credit. So given that WestJet currently has an ADC, a 0 ADC, while carriers like Southwest Airlines have a 6.5 and Alaska provides 5.15, what would like bringing this into WestJet, how would that change our compensation?
So first of all, we'll explain what an average daily credit is. So an average daily credit is almost like a credit, like an average credit for the pairing. So let's just use, for simple math, 5 hours. So let's say every day was worth 5 hours. So if you had a 2-day, it's always going to be worth 10 hours. 3 days always worth 15 hours, or 4 days always worth 20 hours. And so if you have a fairly, inefficient pairing where there's not a lot of flying, let's say it's a 4-day, you're always going to be guaranteed 20 hours of credit. It's not a min daily credit. And I will say min daily credits are not very common in the industry. But an average daily credit will round out those kind of like inefficient pairings that you have. So at least you're always going to have some, guarantee of credit for that pairing.
Okay, no,
that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And actually the next one we've talked about in the flight deck for many, many years here. Your document identifies the current pairing reconciliation reconciles over the entire pairing.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times you might get, de-icing and extra legs and all this sort of stuff. Then they cancel one leg on day 3, and then you get paid the same, even though you're all over the place and you're doing kind of extra flying on some days. How does this system cause any increases in flying throughout the trip to be effectively washed out? Like, why would daily reconciliation provide more transparent and fair credit calculations?
Yeah. So when you look at the industry standard, it's per segment, which means every leg you do is reconciled the original credit or greater what you fly, or at least over the day. And so the problem with ours is that we reconcile everything over the pairing. So if you have one day where you fly a little bit more, one day where you fly a little less, something gets canceled, it all gets washed out because it's being reconciled over the pairing versus the day. And so by having, daily or per segment reconciliation, it's going to capture those times where you spent more time in de-ice, or you, due to headwinds, took a little longer. And where it really helps out, though, is once you start to get into real complicated reassignments and overtime, because then you can imagine it just becomes really simple. So you get paid, it's just, today I was scheduled for this. Well, that's the credit you got.
Mm.
You got reassigned. You would get the greater of the reassignment credit or what you flew. And it's just per day. And it makes it really simple to figure out what you should get paid versus now where it's reconciled over the pairing versus Like just
So talking about rigs and the 4Rs, then like where generally are Canadian carriers at in comparison to American carriers now?
So Canada really lags when we look at trip rigs and reconciliation rules, right? So, we're at an MDPC of 4.25. Air Canada is very similar, but, the industry standard is above 5. Time away from base. Air Canada is still 1 to 4, and we are now 1 to 3.75. Most carriers are 1 to 3, 1 to 3.5. And then we have an ADC. We don't even have that. Air Canada did get it, and they're a 4.5, but, obviously the industry standards are well above 5. So, in general, when it comes to scheduling rules, we're way behind our American carriers, right? And we'll really explore that as we get into some of the reassignment.
Your document states that the company has, quote, repeatedly abused the definition of necessity when it comes to reassignments, as we're talking about reassignments. How would implementing the proposed bucket system that you talk about in the document, like basically categorizing reassignments into defined groups like uncontrollable events versus complete substitution, limit management's ability to reassign pilots for inadequate manpower planning?
I think, it's really interesting when you talk to a lot of American carriers and you say, hey, how do you guys manage your reassignments? They're like, oh, we get time and a half. That's always the standard. When you dive into their contract, what you see is they kind of break up reassignments into, I would call like kind of 2 buckets. And Alaska's got a great, it's very easy to read. So basically they have reassignments, and then they would call like things like a cancellation, a CARS violation, a misconnection, and they would kind of group that into a different bucket. So these are sort of things that are not at the control of, I guess, crew scheduling. They cancel a flight, that was done network planning, you miss a connection, you have a CARS violation. And those reassignment rules would follow along kind of our assignment rules. So, hey, your pairing got canceled, we're going to give you something else. Or the first part of your pairing got canceled, we're going to deadhead you to your original pairing.
What if you like with our bidding system, what if you spend all your points on trying to get, whatever it is, Cancun layovers, and then you're showing up to the airport or whatever, and you get reassigned for your, winter overnights? Is it just money? Is reassignments just money in the industry, or could it be other things that are triggered, or is it just basically money?
So different carriers will handle this differently. So like I said, there's the one bucket with kind of we call it, the cancellation type reassignment rules. And then there's what we'll call like a substitution or a swap. It's where like you bid for that Cancun overnight, you spent your points and whatnot, and they're just going to take that pairing, put it out to open time, and then they're going to give you something less desirable. So now you're overnighting, maybe 2 domestic overnights or something like that. They know they can get rid of that pairing into open time because somebody will pick it up, but they couldn't get rid of that. And so some carriers will sort of limit that a little bit. But what a lot of carriers do is they introduce a concept of what's called a trip override. And you'll find this in most carriers that they say, okay, you can swap my pairing out, but now you're going to pay me for that. You're going to pay me for the flexibility of giving the company that flexibility that they want, right? And so you might say, there's that 3-day pairing, and now I'm doing this other 3-day pairing. It's still flying. It wasn't canceled. Now I'm getting a trip override of time and a half or whatever it happens to be that you negotiated. And you could even imagine that. So Air Canada, they have something called draft on the go. Let's say you pick up a pairing. Now you've purposely went out and picked up a 48-hour layover in Liberia. That's what you really wanted to do. You get to the airport, boom, now you're going to, a totally different place that you didn't bid for. So what they do then is they say, okay, we're going to, this can happen, but we're going to pay you now double time. So what you see is the American carriers have started to introduce this concept of a trip override to really allow the company to have that flexibility, but pay you for that, pay you for the privilege of removing or taking away the flying that you either bid for or, picked up at open time.
And that's something that's relatively standard south of the border?
It's very relatively standard south of the border. Ultimately, the best carrier is Southwest, where any reassignment is, paid at some sort of override. But most carriers like Alaska is this concept of what they would call a reassignment. We would call like maybe a swap or a substitution, where it's, I'm taking your flying, I'm giving it to somebody else, and you're going to be doing this just to keep the operation flying, and they pay an override. And the big thing with the overrides too is that you can use them for all sorts of different things. So to understand the concept of an override, we already have an override already in our schedule. So if you go work an extra day, like you land at 2:15, you get a 4-hour override, right? And so you can either do it by hours or percentages. The standard is percentages. So you can imagine the overrides being applied. You work an extra day, you get an override. 2 extra days, maybe it's a double override. And then the beauty of the overrides, and I think what's really important of them, is they multiply. So we talked to in Alaska, the chair there, and they had somebody who picked up a pairing, and then it was swapped out on them. So that was a 200% override. Then they ended up flying an extra day. At the end of the day, they did a little pickup and they worked one extra day, but they had a 400% override on that pairing.
Which is great for money, but also obviously great for the company to have that operational flexibility. So it goes both ways.
It goes both ways. And what the American carriers have really found out is they will pay to have that flexibility, because it is so expensive to not cover a flight, to have a flight get canceled in, foreign city and stuff like that. So by paying extra money, it's great. And from a pilot perspective, what the Americans have really figured out is getting these additional overrides without doing a lot of extra work, right? So I think that's ideally what we always want, is getting paid more to do the same amount of work or very little.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
We just finished, I was just going over the survey results for the first flight deck feedback survey, and reserve came up a lot. As you know, a lot of people saying reserve is an issue. In your document, reserve pilots may be, quote, continually reassigned throughout their RAP, meaning they must kind of pack their bags for 6 days and be ready for anything. How would applying the same reassignment protections to reserve pilots as line holders provide the structure and balance the document advocates for?
Yeah, so what you see in a lot of contracts is, let's say you're in a 5-day reserve block and you get assigned 3 days. Once you're assigned a 3-day pairing, all the same reassignment rules of a line holder then apply to a reserve holder. That means that the company has to get you back at the end of day 3. They could assign you something at the end of day 3 for the next day, but you get to go home. So it gives you some stability. Now, remember I was talking about those overrides? You could imagine those overrides being applied to a situation like this. Well, maybe they want to extend you an extra day. Well, maybe there's an override there. So this is how these overrides can be used for multiple things in the contract to give the company flexibility, but then to reward the pilots or to give the pilots extra compensation for that flex. That's what you really want.
Yeah, that makes sense. Your document discusses how a daily reserve credit or reserve day value ensures that time spent available to the company is still time committed to work. How would the system help reserve pilots reach their MMG more consistently and allow them to trade reserve blocks with line holders?
Yeah, so right now there's no credit for reserve. Pilot on reserve works up to their MMG, and if they manage to get to 77 and a half hours, they end up blocking out for the month. But if you provide a credit per each day, maybe you only get called 10 days out of the month, and then the other, 8 days would then have a credit applied. So that pilot would probably reach their MMG prior to the 18 days and essentially block out. By adding a reserve credit, it also allows that reserve holder to trade that reserve block to a line holder, right? So there may be line holders that I would do that reserve block, but there's no mechanism right now because there's no credit attached to a reserve block. So Transat actually is a great example of this. They just introduced this in their contract, and it's something that I think we should really aim for in CA3.
Makes sense. Speaking of another hot button issue, in C8.2, I guess SAW came out. The scheduling adjustment window. I've had a lot of experience trying to use it, because just about everything I click on gets denied because someone else picks it up. But while this feature is popular amongst many of our pilots, it currently only allows pilots to swap or pick up pairings, but not drop them. How would adding drop functionality and multiple SAW windows with different selection methods improve pilot flexibility and quality of life?
Yeah, so when we introduced the SAW, it was a hard concept to get across to the company. We were the first in Canada to introduce this idea. And, we had proposed the idea originally of drops, but the whole concept itself was so new that we came with a limited window. And I always knew that this was just a start, right? I'm all about, I think we should, always be looking at ways to maximize scheduling flexibility, to allow you to have the schedule that you want. So that's what the SAW was intended for. So, I think adding the ability to drop a pairing. So Air Canada's copied our idea, and they're going to add drops down to, I think, 60 hours or something like that. And so you could imagine the ability to swap, pick up, and or drop into the SAW to give you a tremendous amount of flexibility. Now, there's obviously limits on drops because you can't have everybody dropping on the same day. So what most companies do is they have either a blackout dates or they use minimum reserve coverage. So they said, hey, we need, 5 guys on reserve. We have 8. So if we allow 3 people to drop, then we still have enough minimum reserve coverage.
The pilots, like if they have a medical appointment or something going on, they're able to create flexibility themselves. So why would the company do something like previously over Christmas? They put a SAW restriction over Christmas. Wouldn't not having a restriction, having the pilots the ability to change their schedule just with other pilots, have pilots getting more flexibility and more operational certainty for the company?
The pairings that are in the SAW come out of the pairing package. So we take some pairings out of the final pairing package, we drop them into the SAW, and then you can switch. What they don't want happening is, I'll use the Christmas example, everybody trying to swap their pairing at the beginning of the month and to open up Christmas, and then they would have a bunch of flying over Christmas that they couldn't cover because they wouldn't have enough reserve coverage. Now, what the industry usually does is they either black out those dates, so that's why we do those, or they provide a minimum reserve coverage over those days. So you could see that you needed 10 reserve pilots on one day, and if you had 12, then there could be 2 pairings that come into the SAW that would cover those days. So, the way that a Southwest might do this is they would say, over Christmas, we need 10 guys on reserve. We have 10 guys, and so there's no drops or there's no SAW drops into the SAW during those days. So there's always limits on that, unfortunately. I think that would be really hard to get to. But I think, just opening it up to drops would allow there to be much more pairings in there and allow it to almost be like a snowball effect. So if I drop a pairing, you might go in there, swap a pairing of that, then your pairing is available, and it just creates a bigger pool to use. And then one of the things we think with the SAW that could be really good is that is multiple windows, right? And what you see in a lot of carriers is different solving methods. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that maybe you have a SAW window that is run by seniority. And I know that gets touchy, but maybe tenure should matter a bit. And maybe the first SAW window, the most senior pilots should have the first kick at the can, per se. That window would close, another window would open up, and maybe it's first come, first serve. Another window would open up and the close, and maybe that's for the reserve pilots, right? So you could build up your schedule for whatever was left over. So these are all options. A lot of it's going to depend on the new software we're getting. So we're moving away from Flicka. Flicka's a real old legacy software. We're moving to a new product made by Jeppesen. I haven't seen all of the details on it yet. I know Alaska uses it. I've spoken with their scheduling committee, and we've seen the interface. It's way better, much more modern, and will automate most of the functions in the saw. So that was one of the problems that we had is when we designed the saw, we actually kind of copied JetBlue a little bit. They use Flicka, and we went to Flicka and said, okay, hey, we copied this JetBlue model. Can you implement it? And by that time, CAA said, we're no longer implementing any changes in Flicka because we're already moving on to our next product. And so we're moving away from CAE and that product. We're moving to this new Jet product.
Okay, well, I'm not going to take the bait on talking about seniority. I'm going to just keep talking about the Jeppesen software here. What kind of timelines are we looking at for potentially rolling out new software within the bidding packages and getting schedules and doing drops and these types of things?
Yeah, so the new Jeppesen product is being worked at. It started already and should go live in 2027. So that sets us up really nicely for CA3. We'll sit down with the company and Jepp over the next 6 months to determine what's its functionality, right? What can it do? What can it do? Maybe some of the ideas that we've suggested here, they're not possible, but maybe there's some other things that it can do. So we're really excited to go to this product. Jepp makes great products, and I'm really interested to see what it could do.
Awesome. Your document concludes stating that when a pilot completes flying or duty time, they should receive the credit for that work clearly, fairly, and without losing value to a reconciliation formula that benefits only the company. How do the 5 priorities of the 4 R's work together to achieve this fundamental principle of fair compensation?
So I think they work together. Some of them work together when you look at it. So trip rigs are going to provide you that credit for the inefficiency in our pairings. Reconciliation is going to ensure that you get reconciled so that you don't get the credit washed out per day. And it's going to make it a lot simpler when we, reconciling overtime and straight time. Reassignment rules by providing value for, the concept of override into a reassignment for those times when they just take away your flying means that you're going to get fair value for the flying you did. And obviously providing better reserve rules and stuff like that will make sure that while you're on reserve, that you're not just being continually abused. And the SAW really gets down to just that flexibility, to giving you, pilot group, the best way to, massage your schedule after the schedule release and stuff like that.
Oh, that makes sense. You often like to talk about the scheduling committee and darts you guys get.
Yeah.
I know you guys are by far get the most darts out of any committee at WestJet.
Yeah.
When you go into the DART system, which is dart.alpa.org, and you see a lot of Q&As that answers a lot of questions,
yeah.
What are you seeing mostly now that's not maybe answered in the questions? Like, what are you getting right now from a lot of people, especially new pilots coming over to our system and learning our contract? And what are you seeing the most of?
Yeah, we get a lot of, obviously it's reassignment questions. Hey, I'm being reassigned this. Is this a legal reassignment? How do I get paid for this? We get a lot of questions on voluntary pairing swaps. We also do with all the pay questions. So we get a lot of that. Those are probably the biggest ones. And then reserve, is this a legal assignment? Is it within the CARs, within the contract and stuff like that? And so, we deal with a lot of darts. We probably deal with 5 to 6 a day. I think last year we answered over 2,100 darts. So it's a lot of darts. We love darts. And if we take a little longer to get back to you, it's only because we have to reach out to somebody, to maybe the company and get an answer or something like that. So.
No, that's fair. What's your committee working on now?
Well, darts, because we get, like I said, 5 to 6 a day. And then really prepping for CA3. So basically, as soon as CA2 ended, we started a document where we've highlighted sections that, need improvement. And we've highlighted 5 things in this document, but there's a lot more. Like there's just language cleanup. There's things that we've identified that just, needs improvement. And some really small minutiae stuff that we've gone over there that we think will, help the pilot group or something like that. We're always looking at ways to, make our contract more clear, better understanding, stuff like that. One thing we didn't touch on, obviously, when we talked about rigs and stuff like that, 100% deadhead credit. That's a major thing. And so what we've also done is we have access to all the back-end software. So we started modeling all the costs so that when the negotiation committee goes into negotiations, they have an understanding of what are the costs for an increase in the time away from base credit. What does 100% deadhead credit look like? What does the addition of all these credits mean? And then we'll run them in a pairing scenario to see, well, what does it do to the pairings? Better? Does it make them worse? What other things to look at and stuff like that. So,
And things like 100% deadhead credit, for example, doesn't mean we would still have the same numbers of deadheads now, because the computer actually might reduce the deadheads considerably because of that.
no. So a lot of our deadheads are driven by network, right? So, or cars, right? So we have pairings where they're just too long to operate there and back. So you operate there and you have to deadhead back, or it's just due to the network frequency, you have to deadhead in to operate somewhere else. So when we ran the system, it doesn't necessarily dramatically decrease the amount of deadheads, but what it does do is it would give you fair compensation for the deadhead, right? Now, I think flight ops, they could go then to network planning and say, hey, can you tighten up some of these areas so we don't have to deadhead all the time.
That makes sense. Is anything else going on? I appreciate you coming in today before your pairing. Is there anything else that you're thinking about with the scheduling committee right now?
No, we just really want, the document is there because we really feel that, scheduling matters, right? And we hope that the pilots, when they do the surveys for the upcoming contract, and then when they talk to their LEC reps and the MEC, that they remember that without proper scheduling rules, and that you can get paid all the money in the world, but if your life is terrible on the road, it's not going to matter much, right? We live and breathe the scheduling rules. So we really, really want people to, understand that these are really important to the lifestyle of pilot.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for putting the document together, John. The document's going to be attached to the email that we send out with this video, so people can do a deeper dive into the attachment. Thank you very much. And thanks for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Good stuff.
Thanks.